In the third hour of Hidden True Crimes We Respond video, John pulls out almost everything: the research, the stalker typologies, the cyberbullying studies, the free speech argument, a thought experiment, self-harm ideation, and eventually, even the Salem Witch Trials. So at this point, this is not just an argument. This is an escalation. But my question is simple. What was the actual conduct? Because that question still matters. Hi, my name is Tina, and welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you're new here. In this video, I want to look at what I'm calling John's grand finale in the We Respond video. And I'm looking at this from a communication perspective. Not because emotional harm doesn't matter, because it really absolutely does, but because categories matter too. Criticism is not automatically stalking. Hurt feelings are not automatically stalking. Even serious emotional distress does not automatically prove stalking. At first, I was trying to organize this section point by point, but I don't think that's the best way to understand it. So I think the better question is, what is each part of the argument doing? And when I look at it that way, I see 5 pieces: the frame, the label, the conduct, the harm, and the escalation. Because once you see the function of each piece, the structure becomes much clearer. At least I hope so. So we're going to do it this way. We'll start with the frame. As I said in part 1, framing is not automatically bad. We all frame things. Anytime we explain a situation, organize information, choose what details matter, or decide where to begin, we are framing. Framing reflects your viewpoint. Always. Framing always reflects your viewpoint, without exception. But the question is, what is the frame doing? Is it helping the audience think more clearly about the facts? Or is it telling the audience what conclusion to reach before they have had a chance to evaluate the facts for themselves? To me, ethical framing does the homework first. It looks at the available evidence. It considers reputable research. It asks whether the frame actually fits the facts. What ethical framing does not do is cherry-pick research to support a narrative that was already chosen. And that distinction matters here, because in this section of the We Respond video, John uses academic research, legal language, cyberbullying studies, a thought experiment, and eventually even the Salem Witch Trials. So the issue is not that he is framing the situation. The issue is whether the frame helps us understand the facts, or whether the frame starts replacing the facts. The second piece is the label. And by label, I mean the category being placed onto a person's behavior. Before John gets to the emotional climax, he spends a lot of time laying the groundwork. He goes through stalking definitions. Then he moves into different types of stalkers, specifically rejected stalkers and resentful stalkers. And this is important, because by the time we get to the emotional thought experiment later, the audience has already been given a category for Christina, the alleged stalker. The audience is not just hearing about Christina anymore. They are being invited to see Christina through the lens of a stalker profile. John is not only explaining stalking in general, he is building a character profile: rejected stalker, resentful stalker, revenge, humiliation, power and control, moral crusade, victim fighting back against an oppressor. And again, my issue is not that these categories exist. My issue is what happens when those categories are placed over this situation before the conduct itself is clearly separated out. Because once a label is placed on someone, the audience may stop asking what happened and start interpreting everything through that label. That is a very powerful framing move, and the label cannot do the work that the evidence has not done. That brings me to the third piece, the conduct. This is the part I keep coming back to. Before we accept the label, we have to look at the conduct. Emotional harm is important and it absolutely matters. Reputational harm also matters. Online cruelty can be serious. But if we are using the word stalking, the conduct still matters. Was there direct conduct? Were there threats? Was there doxing? Was there surveillance? Was there coordination? Were viewers sent after Lauren? Was private information exposed? Was there repeated unwanted pursuit? Because if the answer to those questions is no, then we may be talking about criticism, commentary, cyberbullying, defamation, or public scrutiny. But those are not automatically the same thing as stalking. And this is also why the judge's distinction matters. From what has been discussed publicly, the judge did not appear to accept the idea that hurt feelings or emotional distress from online commentary automatically equals stalking. And that distinction is important because being hurt by online criticism is not the same legal or ethical category as being stalked. And I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying harmful speech can never have consequences. It absolutely can. If someone makes false factual claims that damage a person's reputation, there may be civil remedies for that. That is defamation. If it is written, posted, published, or put online, it is generally discussed as libel. If it is spoken, it is generally discussed as slander. But again, that proves why categories matter. If the issue is a false damaging claim, call it defamation. If the issue is repeated unwanted pursuit or harassment, then we can talk about stalking. But we cannot collapse every hurtful or damaging thing online into one label. It just doesn't work that way. The category is important. The fourth piece is the harm. After the stalker typology, John moves into the victim impact. He talks about cyberbullying and cyberstalking research. He talks about anxiety, depression, loneliness, self-harm ideation, low self-esteem, and the long-term damage of online posts being preserved and viewed repeatedly. And again, this is serious. I am not minimizing that. But here is a shift. The argument starts moving from, did this conduct meet the standard for stalking, to, look how badly this harms someone. And those are not the same question. Impact is evidence of impact. It is not automatically evidence of stalking. Victim impact matters here, but victim impact cannot become the only evidence that stalking occurred, because then the emotional outcome becomes a proof of the original accusation. There is also a moment in the thought experiment where John becomes visibly emotional. He appears to choke up. I did not see tears, but honestly, that is not the point. The point is that the audience understands what he is alluding to. He appears to be referring back to Lauren's 9-hour live, where she talked about experiencing self-harm ideation. And I want to be very careful here. I do not doubt that Lauren experienced that. For a minute, I do not doubt that she went through all of the upset and everything, including self-harm ideation. And for that, I do have a lot of compassion for anybody who experiences that. It's horrible. So I am not questioning her internal state. I am not minimizing how serious that is. What I am questioning is the framing of causation. Because once that emotional crisis is placed inside this argument, the viewer is being asked to connect it back to Christina's conduct, almost as if the severity of Laura's distress proves the stalking frame. But severe distress does not automatically tell us what caused it. And it does not automatically prove that the conduct meets the category being claimed. Someone can be genuinely harmed by a situation, and we can still ask whether the evidence supports the label being used. That is not cruelty. That is clarity. The fifth piece is the escalation. This is where John's argument moves from research into moral emergency. He moves into the free speech argument. He talks about the defense that this was free speech, or mean girls, or a catfight. And then he introduces a thought experiment. This is where the argument escalates, because the free speech argument is not really presented as where is the legal boundary between commentary and harassment. It is presented more like, so what? Should people be allowed to destroy someone's life and call it free speech? And that is a very different frame. The real question is not, should someone be allowed to destroy another person under the banner of free speech? The real question is, when does public commentary cross into defamation, harassment, cyberbullying, or stalking? Those are very different questions, and they require different evidence. John's thought experiment is extreme, in my opinion, very extreme. In the hypothetical, someone repeatedly accuses another person of horrific abuse. They follow that person through major life stages. They target her reputation, her jobs, her marriage, her children, her ability to make a living. And the hypothetical keeps escalating until the person is completely devastated. That is not a neutral example. That is a maximal harm hypothetical. A thought experiment can clarify an issue, but it can also stack the deck. Because if you replace the disputed facts with the most extreme version possible, the audience may accept the conclusion emotionally before they ever compare the facts. And that is a substitution problem. The thought experiment only works if the audience accepts the substitution. But if the facts are not the same, the moral conclusion may not transfer. In the hypothetical, the person is directly named, repeatedly targeted, accused of horrific crimes, followed across years of events, and allegedly loses jobs and community standing because of those accusations. But if the real-world conduct was commentary videos, no direct contact, no naming, no doxing, no showing up, no surveillance, and no instruction to viewers to swarm someone, then we are not dealing with the same fact pattern. And this is where the analysis has to slow down, because if you change the facts, you may also change the category. And then, by the end, John reaches for one of the most emotionally loaded examples in American history, the Salem Witch Trials. That comparison does a lot of work, because Salem immediately brings up ideas of hysteria, false accusation, mob persecution, moral panic, and innocent people being destroyed by a crowd. So by the end, the viewer has been moved from, what did Christina actually do, to, is this a witch hunt? And that is a major rhetorical shift. It emotionally colors the entire situation. So when I look at this section as a whole, I see an escalation ladder. The frame, the label, the conduct, the harm, the escalation. And inside that escalation, we go from academic authority to stalker typologies to cyberbullying research to victim impact to free speech as danger to a catastrophic thought experiment to self-harm ideation to Salem Witch Trials. That is not just an argument. That is an escalation. John begins this section as a professor with a textbook. He ends it as a narrator of a witch hunt, and that is why the framing matters. So my issue with this section is not that emotional harm does not matter. It does. My issue is that emotional harm is used to collapse distinctions that still matter. Criticism is not automatically cyberbullying. Cyberbullying is not automatically stalking. Defamation is not automatically stalking. Public scrutiny is not automatically persecution. And serious distress does not automatically prove the category being claimed. The question still has to be, what was the actual conduct? Because once the audience stops asking that question, the framing has already done its job. So let me know what you noticed in this section, especially around the thought experiment and the Salem Witch Trial comparison. And if you want the full recap of the entire We Respond video, that is probably where we go next. because once you step back from all nearly 4 hours, the pattern becomes much easier to see. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you next time.